friends, welcome to the farm kitchen at Haven Acres. I'm Stacy, and today I am doing something new and different to me. It's probably something many of you have already done. Please leave a comment if I'm doing something wrong or if you have a better way, anything like that. I would love to hear from you. And please make sure to give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whatever works for you. We really do appreciate it, and it does help our channel. Today is January 2nd, and like many of you, I am thinking of things to do in the winter that will help nourish our bodies, nourish our souls, and make best use of our finances and our time. So today, I am going to try to make wild sourdough starter, meaning I'm trying to make sourdough starter from the wild yeast that is just naturally in the air. And no matter where you live, there is wild yeast that's in the air. This is something that you can do. Well, supposedly. I've never done it before, but we're going to try today. So I'm just going to give you the nuts and bolts of what I have figured out in doing research. I'm a very simple girl. I like to do things that are easy, and I hope that I can explain this in a way that makes sense to you and take some of the stress out of sourdough. From my understanding, what we need to do is always have equal measurements. So we need to have equal measurements of flour, water, and then as we progress, equal measurements of flour, water, and sourdough starter. Today is our first day of making the starter, so of course that's not in the equation. Today, it's simply all-purpose white flour and tap water. For me, tap water because we have a well. If you are on city water, you would want to use water that you purchase at the store or water that you get from a spring, or run to the neighbor's house that has a well and ask if you can have a cup of water. You just don't want chlorine or chemicals in your water that you're using for your sourdough starter. In my experience, when you're baking or doing something like this, that you want to be pretty particular about the measurements, weighing the measurements are always better, or going by weight is always better than using a measuring cup or measuring spoons. Because, for instance, especially with something like flour, if you have 3 different people measuring flour, everyone's measurement of flour in a cup, for instance, is going to weigh different. There's actually going to be a different amount because some people are really going to have a heavy hand, and when the flour dumps in, it's going to compress. And then someone's going to be very gentle, so theirs is going to be light and fluffy. Someone's going to tap it down, it will compress. Someone's going to just take a knife and go across the top, and it's going to be lighter. So it varies. Everything varies. If you're using a weight as your measurement, you'll know that it's the weight that it is. So for this, I would recommend using a scale. If you don't have one, that doesn't mean that you can't do it. Try it. Just use a measurement. But again, for today, the first day of our wild yeast flour dough starter, flour dough? For today, the first day of our wild yeast sourdough starter, we're going to use a scale, and we are simply using flour and water. The other things that we'll need for today are a spoon or something to stir. You'll need a jar. You do not need to have a lid because you're either going to put the lid on very loosely or cover it with something else. For me, this is the something else. It's a beautiful little napkin that my stepmother made, and this sourdough is going to be out where I can see it, and at least I want it to look pretty while it's sitting there. And then also a rubber band or string, or if you just have the lid, you could just put it on very loosely, just like set it on the top. So let's go. All right, first things first, scale is getting turned on. I am going to use grams just because that's what I want to do. Doesn't matter what you do, that's just what I'm doing today. I'm going to put my jar on the scale. I'm going to hit the tare twice. It's going to zero it out. So now the scale is at 0. That way when I add my flour, I'll know what the exact measurement is. Today I'm going to try for 50 grams. Spilt some. Let's get it off there. What do I have? I have 52 grams. I'm going to go with it. And I'll just remember to put 52 grams of water in. Why did I only put such a small amount in here? Is because every day for about 4 or 5 days potentially, we're going to be adding more and more. So I want a larger jar with a smaller amount, because every day I'm going to be adding and adding. If I added a large amount to begin with, we would overflow this, or we'd have to have a larger container, or we would have to throw some away. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to be wasteful. So we are starting with 50 grams. I'm going to tare that, get rid of our flour, and I'm going to add 52 grams because that's what I started with. Doesn't matter, cold, hot, warm, room temperature, water, doesn't matter what the temperature is of the water. 52 grams. We're at 51. Now we're at 54. Not a big deal. Shut it off so we don't waste the battery, and give it a stir. Okay, as you can see, the consistency is, I think, a little thicker than what we wanted. However, I did use the appropriate measurements. So I'm just going to keep it like that and see what happens. And normally in the kitchen when I'm baking, your hands are your best cooking tools, in my opinion. However, for this, because even though I have clean hands, I want to make sure that nothing gets in this starter other than the wild geese that should be going in there. So I'm simply I just grabbed another little utensil. I'm going to scrape this off so that all of our starter is in the jar. That's not going to fit in there. Okay, so there you have it. It's in there. We're going to put this little cloth on the top. It's a clean cloth. I'm going to put the rubber band around it, simply just to keep dirt, debris, dust, hair, whatever's floating in the air, keep it out of this. Now, you just want to find a warmish spot in your house, not hot, not excessively warm, just a normal place in your house. And my house is very cold, and this wood cook stove, although we use it to heat the kitchen, this part of it is not hot. It's just gets whatever warmth comes off the wood stove. I'm simply going to put my jar, tuck it into this corner, and we'll come back and check it tomorrow, 24 hours later. Okay, today is day 2, and in our house it is currently 56 degrees Fahrenheit. It did get colder overnight, so because of that, this starter is going to grow more slowly. If your house is closer to 68, 70 degrees, it's probably going to be more active. Let's take a look and see what we have. Okay, day 2, here we go. I'm gonna just pop this off, and I don't know if you can see it, but there is a couple of bubbles in there. Get my finger out of the way. There are a couple of bubbles in there, which is a great sign. However, based on what I'm reading about and seeing, is there should be more bubbles before you feed it for the first time. So I'm actually going to move this out. This is not hot here. This is warm. That's hot. I'm going to move it over here. It is at least warmer. And I have some turkey pie filling and some turkey stock in the pressure canner right now, and I'm going to put those here to set overnight. That will give a little heat, and just radiant heat, you know, and then I think by tomorrow that will be active enough that we can do the first feeding. Yours, as I said, might be more active than mine if you have a warmer house, and you may need to feed yours on the second day. Another thing I wanted to mention is I used just plain all-purpose white flour that you can get at the store, because I like to show people that things don't have to be difficult. You can do amazing things with very basic items. That's my style. That's what I like to do. However, I have read for better results, you would want to start with a whole wheat flour. And of course, whole wheat is better for you. And if you can find organic flour, then that's wonderful as well. But like I said, I like to keep things real, and I like to show you that you can make amazing things with just minimal basic ingredients. We'll see you tomorrow for day 3. So day 3, let's take a look. There's life in there. Get it focused. Can you see that? All of those bubbles. That is active cultures. There's life in there. I'm guessing for the majority of people, day 3 would be a day that you would start adding flour and water, equal parts, to your starter. I'm going to let mine set for another 24 hours and see what it looks like tomorrow. Based on what I'm seeing, that life, we want it even more lively. So we want it to be growing up the sides a little bit more than it is. So I'm just going to be patient and leave mine sitting on the little warm area of the wood cook stove for another 24 hours. If you are on day 3 and your starter is really rising up the sides, today would be the day you would add flour and water equal parts to your starter and stir it in. That would be considered your first feeding. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to let it set, and I'll be back with you tomorrow for day 4. All right, today's day 4. Let's see. I can already tell you it smells different. And it looks different. Okay, day 4, as I walked over to the jar on the wood cook stove, I could smell it before I even opened the top. To me, it smelled like cheese. And yeah, it definitely, to me, smells like cheese, which is the active, it's the yeast, it's the things are working here. It hasn't risen a lot up the sides, but I think today I'm going to go for it. As much of a science as this is, it's also not a science. Living things want to live. That goes for the garden, for animals, for bacteria, for yeast, for anything. If it's alive, it wants to live. So we're going to go for it. So for today, I have weighed 50 grams of white flour and 50 grams of our well water. As you can see, or maybe you can't, I'll try and hold it so you can. 50 grams of water and flour are different measurements. So this is why I'm choosing to weigh it. There's far less water volume-wise in the jar than there is flour. I would say to you, if you don't have a way to measure it weight-wise and you're going to use volume, I really think you're going to be okay. Just be consistent. So whatever you do, if you do a half a cup of flour and a quarter cup of water, or a half a cup of flour and a half a cup of water, whatever you decide off the bat, just do the same thing. I think consistency is more the key than anything, and to have the right texture, have the right consistency. I guess consistency is the word in the jar. You want it to be more like pancake batter than biscuit batter. No biscuit batter, pancake batter. You don't want it too runny, but you don't want it stiff either. So just like a nice pancake batter, it's fine. So today, all I'm doing is I'm going to add water, flour into my sourdough starter, and I'm going to give it a stir. This is my coffee. We're not adding this in here, but it's delicious. that's the magic. I'm gonna stir it up. I guess I could have got something with a little longer handle, but we'll make this work. I'm actually going to get a little more water and I'll show you. It's super thick in there. Okay, here we are on day 5 and I'm late, which is kind of a no-no with sourdough starter. You're supposed to stay as consistent as possible with the timing of feeding. 2 things happened. We had two basketball games this morning and we had to leave super early, which carried us through the time that I would normally feed. I am now 4 hours late in my feeding. And the wood stoves went out while we were gone, so it's super cold in the house. That is going to affect the starter, but I'm just going to carry on because that's all you can do. And this is flour and water. This isn't, open heart surgery or something. So we're just going to do what we do. It definitely still has that soury smell to it. There's definitely bubbles in here, so there's still life. You can kind of see in the jar there's like a line of liquid, and I'm guessing that's because it needs to be fed and it's separating a little bit, but there is life in there. So what I'm going to do today for the first time for me, because our house is chilly and I think it's finally starting to get some life to it, I am going to remove 50 grams of what's in here before I add the new 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. I'm going to treat this as my first discard day, discarding part of what's in here. If you follow directions from other people, you will probably be doing that on day 2 or 3. However, since I'm having to use kind of common sense or baking skill, just knowledge, I knew it wasn't ready yesterday. It just wasn't lively enough. But today we're gonna go for it. And who knows, maybe it's not lively enough today either. We'll find out tomorrow, right? Okay, so first off, let's give it a stir. Get that liquid incorporated back in there. It's definitely smelling sour. So we're gonna stir, stir, stir. Stir, stir, stir. We're going to turn the scale on. Weigh our container for the discard, tare it so it's down to 0, and I am going to put, it's definitely loose, which I knew it was yesterday. But again, we're not sweating the small stuff here. We're going to get rid of 50 grams. I'm doing this not to be the perfect sourdough bread maker. I'm doing this to show you, you can be a really imperfect person and still make sourdough bread. I hope. That's how I run my life. All right, that was 50 grams. So I'm going to get rid of that. We're going to shut the scale off, maybe, come on. Off, there we go. And I'm just going to take the 50 grams of flour from today. So there's roughly I would say roughly 100 grams of material left in here, and we're going to be adding, right, 100 grams. So 100 grams in here, there's 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water. So we're working in equal parts of new flour and new water, and it's just how it's going to work out today. It's roughly the same weight. Flour, mixing this in. And we're gonna mix in water. I'm gonna hold some back because I really think it's a little more liquidy than it needs to be. Remember I said we were trying to get like a nice pancake batter thickness? Well, that, as you can see, was not pancake batter thickness. So the consistency is more important than the amounts. Use the amounts as a guide, but use the consistency as what you're judging on. Okay, so this is better. If I can do this without spilling. Can you see? Much better. All right, it's all mixed in. Try to scrape down the sides so I can actually see when it's growing. All right. That's day 5. On day 6, I got super impatient and I started a wheat starter. It's the one on the left. Day 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I did the same thing with the feeding daily. And as you can see, I've got live starter. You may have also noticed that the wheat starter that I started 6 days after the whole wheat starter caught right up. So it is true, wheat flour does do better than white flour. I switched things up just to make it confusing, and the scale was on ounces, not grams. So I have 5 ounces of whole wheat starter, and I'm going to add 5 ounces of whole wheat flour and 5 ounces of water. I should have used a larger container. As you can see, I've started making this sourdough starter even thicker. It's just my experience, my very limited experience, that pancake batter is not a great description, even though that's what everyone uses. It really does need to be a little bit, like, definitely a thick pancake batter, not your normal pancake batter. I got rid of the pretty top because it's just kind of a hassle to put it on. So instead, I just used the lid, loosely fitting, no ring or anything. And then an elastic band slid down to the line of the dough lets you see how much your starter is growing. Okay, Smarty Pants, you go ahead and try it one-handed. It's not that easy. And I found the perfect spot in the proofing box of the wood cook stove. It stays between 80 and 100 degrees. Okay, because throwing things away really stresses me out. I don't like to be wasteful, and our food is money. A lot of people will take this discard, which is the part of the sourdough starter that you removed. A lot of people will take that and throw it away or give it to their chickens. I have done both of those things, but today I am actually going to use it to make something. We're going to make some simple crackers, and I've already made these once, and it makes me wonder, is this where wheat thins come from? Do they just take the discard from the sourdough factories and make wheat thins? Because that's what they taste like. We are going to lightly oil 2 cookie sheets or baking sheets. You could use parchment paper. If you have nice silicone mats, you could put those down. I'm using oil because that's what I have. So don't sweat the small stuff. If you have olive oil or lard or sunflower oil or vegetable oil or Crisco, whatever you have that you want to use, you go ahead and put a thin layer of that. I bet butter would be good too. I've not ever tried it with butter. Note to self for next time, try butter. But we just want a thin layer just so the discarded dough does not stick. We're going to put this discarded dough in a really thin layer. Okay, I'm going to use my whole wheat starter. Look how nice and bubbly that is. Wow, that is alive. And I'm just going to pour a little bit on the pan. And you want it pretty thin. This pan is old and it's kind of curled up a little bit, so it's probably going to be thicker in the middle, but we really want to get an even layer if possible, and as, I don't want to say as thin as possible, but pretty thin. Okay, you can see it's pretty thin on the pans. You can actually see the pan through the dough, and that's what we want. The thinner the dough is spread, the crispier the cracker will be. If it's thicker, those are apt to be doughy. But it's not rocket science, it's just making crackers. You take the dough out halfway through the baking, so after 20 minutes, and you score it. I totally think this would be easier with a pizza cutter, which is what I will try next time. I mean, the knife works, but it was just kind of difficult And of course, I'm holding a knife in one hand and the phone in the other, so I can't hold the pan either. Forgot the salt. I'll add it now. Because I'm fancy, I decided to add some everything seasoning. It really took a good 16 days for my starter to flourish, and I'm so glad it did. Okay, friends, so how my two sourdough starters, white and wheat, turned into 5 sourdough starters is just by accident and necessity. So yesterday I had an appointment and I had to get up really early, and I was going to miss the time frame of feeding for the sourdough starter. So my option really was to get up early, feed and discard my sourdough starter 5 hours early, or just separate it and feed it, which is what I did. I separated and fed. So now I have 5. I'm not going to carry on with 5 though. That's a lot. 2 is a lot. 2 is a lot of flour being used every day. I don't plan to bake every day. We don't need to eat that much bread or bread products. And I think in reality, 1 is going to be sufficient. However, I'll probably keep 2 alive for a while in the hopes that I can share with someone. But so we are on day 17 for the white starter, and we are on day 11 for the wheat starter. The wheat starter definitely flourished more quickly. The wheat starter actually came to be quicker than the white for sure, but now they are both flourishing starters. So I just want to say, have patience, because I definitely did not. I 100% wanted to give up several times and was like, what am I doing wrong? And I just kept reading, and people were like, you're not doing anything wrong. Just follow the measurements, follow the timing, and you just have to wait. Everyone's house is a little different, and it just took longer for mine. That's all. It might not take so long for yours. So just, if it does, don't worry about it. Just keep going, keep trying if you want to. With some of the starter, I'm making dough today, 2 loaves. For now, one's getting fed, one's going in the refrigerator, and these 3 are going to be added into this bag, and they're going in the freezer. My loaves did not brown up on the top at all. I missed the whole part about keeping them covered. But it was cooked inside, and it tasted like sourdough bread. Okay, now that I am on day 20 from when I started my first sourdough starter, I wanted to go over a few things that I learned. Just some information that I want to share with you that might help you out. So 20 days ago, I started with my white all-purpose regular flour and water. 6 days after that, because I was impatient, I started with the Bob's Red Mill wheat flour and water. I started 2 separate starters because I had read that wheat flour matures more rapidly. And I was getting impatient after 6 days. I know, go figure. But I really in my heart wanted to prove that you can make sourdough starter from regular white flour and water. It doesn't get any more simple than that. Or does it? Making sourdough starter, in my opinion, is time consuming. And it's not so much that the time needed daily is a huge amount, because it's not. You're basically in your starter stirring it, taking out some of that starter, adding flour, adding water, stir it again, put the lid back on, tuck it away. That's it. So maybe 10 minutes a day. But that's 10 minutes a day, twice a day. You want it to be at roughly the same time every day. And in my case, that was 18 days of doing that before I could even start making bread or anything else. To me, it's just one extra thing to babysit, but I'm glad I did it. It's not difficult. So making the starter isn't difficult. Like I said, flour and water, stir it. Ta-da, you're done. It's not difficult at all. I would say if you don't care about starting your own starter, creating your own wild yeast starter, and you just want to make sour bread, you just want to learn sourdough bread, you just want to learn the skill of making sourdough bread, I would highly recommend getting sourdough starter from a friend, a neighbor, a relative. Buy it on Amazon, buy it wherever you buy it. I don't know where you buy it, but I would highly recommend that. If you solely want to just make sourdough bread or things using sourdough discard, I would highly suggest purchasing your sourdough starter or getting it from someone. You will skip that whole 1 to, up to 3 weeks of feeding that starter and creating it and having it grow strength. You'll skip that whole part. It will already be an active, ready to roll starter. That's really what you want. Don't mind the door. It definitely was wasteful. So at the beginning, when you're creating your own wild yeast starter from scratch, it is wasteful. To me, it is. Because every day you are removing, twice a day actually, removing some of what you just added, the flour and the water. Granted, it's just flour and water, but to me it's still wasteful. And you have to do that as your sourdough matures, because sourdough is fermented. So there are beneficial bacteria and harmful bacteria, and they're like having a battle. Like that's how you can think of sourdough starter, is when you first create it, is a fermentation and the bacteria is battling it out. Who's going to win? Ultimately, as we know in life, thank you, Jesus Christ, good wins over evil. So your good bacteria wins over the bad bacteria in the end. But you don't want to make any food or anything while it's battling it out. You don't want to make food that is full of bad bacteria. That would just be dumb. So until you reach that time where your starter is fermenting and it's doubling in size every day for 3 days in a row, until then, you're throwing that starter out. And for me, that was really discouraging. I'm still glad I did it though. And another tip I learned, probably the last thing I'm going to leave you with, is as I was creating this starter, I then had it in my head that, oh, this using sourdough is so wasteful, and why would I do this? Because I can just get yeast out of my refrigerator and make bread, and it's easy, and it's not, drawn out over a 2-day period to make a loaf of bread. I can just make it. I don't have to throw things away. What I've learned is that people in groups or books sometimes make sourdough seem far more difficult than it is. Once you have your starter in a situation like mine is now, both the white and the wheat, that it's active and it's thriving, it's healthy. If I'm not going to make bread, I just put it in the refrigerator, which is exactly what I've done. As you may or may not be able to see behind me, there's no sourdough in my area anymore. I put it in the refrigerator because I currently have 2 loaves of sourdough bread that I made, and I've made a bunch of things with discard that I don't plan on making more bread within the next week, probably. We're not huge bread eaters. So I don't have to feed it that whole time for that whole week. It's just in the refrigerator. It's fine. I don't have to feed it. I'm not throwing anything away. I don't have to think about it. I'm not gonna lie, as soon as I put that in the refrigerator this morning, I was like, okay, one less thing I have to think about. I know that seems silly, but in my life, that's just the way it is. So you don't have to waste it once you get it established, which is a reason why getting started from someone else or purchasing it may be the way to go if your mindset is, I don't want to waste. So all in all, I would say a few things. If you're interested in sourdough bread making, go for it. It's flour and water. It's not, brain surgery. It's easy. It really is. And if you have basic knowledge on bread baking or baking in general, you'll have it. Don't be afraid. I guess that's my point. You can make it at home from scratch with just flour, just water. You don't have to have anything fancy. You can make it as difficult or as easy as you want it. And you know what? In the end, if you screw up, it's flour and water. But I truly believe because you are creating and encouraging something that's living, it wants to live, I honestly think you would have to try really hard before you screwed up your starter. So go for it. If you're thinking about it, there's no better time than the winter to start your sourdough starter. I know you can do it. Thanks for joining me in the farm kitchen, and I hope that you have a great day.